Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. This is the second event from our Sterile Filling 101 webinar series, and today we will discuss engineering runs. What are they, and are they necessary? The takeaways from today will include what to expect to happen in your engineering run, the advantages and disadvantages of performing such a run, and which projects do and do not need an engineering run. Today we have Vice President of Formulation and Technology Transfer, Dr. Shufeng Sun, and BSM's two process engineering managers, Dr. Jake Kranz and Dr. Saran Malhi, to speak. My name is Sarah, and I will be a host for today. Very quickly, we welcome your questions at any point during this presentation. To ask a question, select the arrow in the toolbar at the right-hand side of your screen, write in your question, and click Send. Now that's out of the way, let's get started. So first, I want to invite Dr. Shufeng Sun at Berkshire Sterile to speak. Shufeng, what is an engineering run?
Hey, Sarah. Engineering runs are essentially practice GMP runs. They are a critical step in developing and fine-tuning your fill-finish process to mitigate the risk and encourage a successful GMP run. An engineering run tests the protocol under real-world conditions to optimize the process or identify and resolve any issues prior to performing a GMP run. An engineering run is not a substitute for performing studies or development work, including formulation, filter, fill, and lyophilization studies are performed before the engineering run to fill knowledge gaps and develop a process both the CMO and the client are confident in. Once this process is decided on, it will be tested in an engineering run. Only then will the process move forward to a GMP setting. Here's what to expect in your engineering run. Your CMO will have a completed batch record prepared before the run. It will be reviewed by both the CMO and the client before the run is initiated, and the run will follow the batch record. Typically, the same volume of drug product that you will be preparing in the GMP run will be prepared in the engineering run, using the same excipients, materials, equipment, and drug substance that you expect to use in your GMP run. The CMO will also stereo filter all this drug product. After sterilization, the bulk drug product will be hooked up to the filling line you expect to fill on, and a predetermined number of units will be filled. In filling, we only need to do as few units as necessary to demonstrate that the filling is progressing as expected. If you expect to fill tens of thousands of units in your GMP fill, you may only need to fill a tenth of that number in your engineering run. If you're filling as few as 100 units, your CMO will likely fill the same number of units in your engineering run. The number of filled units can also be adjusted up by the client if they would like to use the product for testing. Although it cannot be used for human use, it can be used for preclinical studies or other testing. If you have a lyophilized product, then the filled units will be lyophilized in your engineering run. Once the product is filled, it will undergo visual inspection. Usually, only a small sample is inspected, likely around 10 to 20%. This helps to confirm if the manufacturing process was well controlled. We may also perform some quality testing in the analytical lab, such as pH and concentration, to determine if the product met the acceptable ranges. Let's discuss what an engineering run is not. Engineering runs are not GMP runs. So a VHP cycle to sanitize the filling line prior to filling your product won't be included. And neither will environmental monitoring. At BSM, the client can request that these be added for an additional cost, but the engineering run will not undergo the same quality review and standards necessary to deem the batch as safe for human use. What you're getting in an engineering run is valuable information about your process. After the run is completed, we go over what we need to fix or improve on before we go forward with a GMP run. You don't want the GMP run to the test subject And there can be significant risk associated with a GMP run if an engineering run isn't performed beforehand. In addition to the process, the engineering run also helps identify any errors in the batch record. The batch record is hundreds of pages long, and while it will undergo a review from many parties, performing the actions written in the record is the most thorough review that can be offered. By walking through the record, errors such as incorrectly written concentrations or an incorrect order of steps can be easily identified. For example, recently, we had an engineering run where it was discovered that the density given to us by the client was incorrect, and this resulted in a 12% reduction in the concentration of the drug product. The engineering run identified this critical error, and it ultimately saved the client a lot of time and money than if we had jumped right into the GMP batch. Fill finish is expensive, extensive, and often complicated. So transitioning a process, whether it is brand new or well established, at a new CMO will typically require an engineering run to ensure good control strategy.
Thank you, Shufeng. I would like to discuss the advantages and disadvantages now of performing an engineering run. We have Process Engineering Manager, Dr. Jake Kranz, to speak. So Jake, can you tell us what a client has to gain and lose from performing an engineering run?
Hi, Sarah. Of course. With everything, there are advantages and disadvantages. I'll start with the positives. Engineering runs are excellent for verifying equipment, determining optimal acceptance criteria, fine-tuning filtration and filling assemblies, confirming formulation and filling times, reviewing the batch record, and of course, providing training to operators. I'll go into more detail for each. Engineering runs are excellent for verifying equipment fit. Equipment is used in every drug manufacturing process, but some formulations may call for unique equipment. For example, a highly viscous solution may require an overhead mixing shaft, special filters, and a piston pump. The engineering run is helpful to demonstrate that the equipment works as expected for the product and it is effective. There are also thousands of possible container closure combinations. It's important to undergo an engineering run to ensure the filler that will be used functions nominally with your specific combination of container and closure choice. At BSM, we can adapt our filler to fill syringes, vials, cartridges, or sometimes custom containers by switching out several tools on the machine. These tools are called change parts or size parts. Our semi-automated line has approximately a dozen change parts, depending on the project, that must be tailored to the specific container closure. And our automated line will have about 40 change parts per container closure. We do have change parts for many common container and closure sizes, but any custom or unique container closure will require unique change parts. And we can prepare those parts in-house or receive them through our supplier, who's located just a 2-hour drive away. When you're working with so many custom pieces, it's in your best interest to test in the real-world conditions to ensure they're operating in unity. There's no better way to evaluate equipment fit in a new process or a new facility than performing an engineering run. Engineering runs are also used to determine the optimal acceptance criteria parameters. If in-process and release testing will be performed in your GMP fill, it's important to ensure that your acceptance criteria can be met and met consistently. If they cannot, then this can hint that there are issues in the formulation process, in the analytical method, or in the acceptance criteria parameters. If the acceptance criteria parameters are the issue, then the client and the CMO can decide if a batch may require less stringent requirements where this is allowed. Weight checks are another great example of this. It may be shocking just how many physical properties of the drug product and the equipment used in sterile filling will affect the accuracy and consistency of the dispensed volume throughout the sterile filling process. Accuracy and consistency are especially important to evaluate for products that are viscous, but not quite viscous enough to require a piston pump. During this type of fill, the speed of the filler may need to be reduced to prevent a vacuum from forming near the pump. If a vacuum is formed, then it can create bubbles in the line and lead to inconsistent dispensed volumes. The engineering run will be able to inform the CMO and the client of any issues and potential solutions to provide consistent volume across all units. Engineering runs are also helpful to fine-tuning the filtration and filling assemblies. The length, ID, and thickness of the tubing, the material of the tubing, the fasteners used, and more are all adjusted from process to process. It's important to ensure the assembly is effective for each formulation. Many factors, including nitrogen overlay, flow rate, filling needle position, and your choice of container and closure system, will affect the requirements for your fill line assembly. Fine-tuning the assembly to ensure that all parts of the filling assembly are working in harmony and effectively filling your product will ultimately reduce the number of rejects in your GMP fill and protect you against the failing lot. While studies can be performed to gather more information on this, the engineering run mimics real-life conditions, and it's the best at uncovering any issues before they arise on the very expensive GMP run. Engineering runs also help confirm the formulation and filling times. Time estimates for formulation and filling activities are important to know so the CMO can ensure they have the staff and support to perform the activity. For many companies that are requesting small-scale filling for a new project, they may not have a true estimate of the time involved because they may not have formulated a batch as large as what they're requesting. This will affect scheduling. We want to ensure formulations or fills do not run for too long and disrupt other planned activities, but it's also a concern to the client if their product is temperature sensitive. We need to ensure that we have the staff on hand, the room set aside, and the space in our temperature-controlled storage units to meet the needs of the GMP fill. All engineering run helps confirm or determine the time requirements for each step in the manufacturing process. The batch record also receives an in-depth review during the engineering run. Batch records can be over 200 pages long, and while it will have many eyes on it from each major department and the client, it's not impossible for a mistake to make it into the final approved document. An engineering run allows the CMO and the client to agree on a batch record far in advance of the GMP run, and then it's tested in real-world conditions during an engineering run. The batch record will receive much more scrutiny when it's being performed in a formulation and fill. The engineering run is a great opportunity for the CMO to find any mistakes and correct them before the GMP run. Finally, the engineering run provides training to operators. These practice runs give operators the ability to learn, understand, and train on your new process. This breeds a team that's ready for your GMP run. This is especially important for projects that have a complex formulation, a unique piece of technology, or a custom container involved in their project. Engineering runs at BSM can be scheduled to ensure the same team that will be working on your GMP run will perform your engineering run. Now that we've discussed the advantages of an engineering run, let's discuss the disadvantages. The major deterrents for an engineering run are the obvious: time, money, and resources. Let me explain. First, with time, the engineering run needs to be scheduled prior to the GMP run. So if a client is on an expedited timeline and needs their product in hand within a couple of months, for example, then they may not have the flexibility to perform an engineering run. In 2020, we performed quite a few expedited fills for COVID treatments and vaccines. Some of these projects were filled only 4 to 6 weeks after receiving a signed quote. In these projects, the timeline was so tight it wasn't possible to do a risk-reducing engineering run, so we jumped right into the GMP run while crossing our fingers. At Berkshire Sterile, you can expect the engineering run to be scheduled approximately a month in advance of the GMP run. The time between the engineering run and the GMP run allows for the process engineers to make any necessary changes to the filling process, the batch record, or the schedule before we proceed with GMP. Next, money is another deterrent for opting into an engineering run. These runs are not free. Engineering runs require time to be booked on the filling line and formulation rooms. They involve a significant amount of work from many employees in all groups, and they use resources. All this costs money, so you can expect your CMO to charge for the engineering run. However, because the run is relaxed, does not involve QA oversight or review, does not include a VHP cycle or environmental monitoring, and typically requires only a fraction of the filling work than a true GMP run, you can expect an engineering run to cost less than your GMP run. At BSM, for example, if a GMP run costs $160,000 per lot of drug product, then an engineering run may cost $140,000. We consider performing an engineering run to reduce the risk of a failing GMP batch as a cost-effective measure at BSM, but the cost is a downside of performing an engineering run. Finally, resources are another drawback of engineering runs. If a client has a difficult time procuring their drug substance, or if it is expensive, then they may not be interested in performing an engineering run because they're concerned it will waste their drug product. This is true. It's either a cost that they may want to take to avoid a failed GMP batch, or they may opt out of an engineering run. Or, as we can do at BSM, they may decide to use dunnage instead. Dunnage is an inexpensive substitute with similar physical properties as the true drug product solution. While the engineering run will not provide the same level of information as it would with the true API, dunnage can still offer clients the ability to perform an engineering run without having to use their high-value drug substance. There are downsides to engineering runs. Many clients we've spoken to have these concerns about spending a significant amount of time, money, and resources on a run that, to them, doesn't seem necessary. However, the advantages of an engineering run and the information collected from it will often outweigh the disadvantages. Your CMO will be able to tell you if your project needs an engineering run, or if they're willing to bypass the run and go straight to GMP. But you should expect your CMO to suggest an engineering run when you transfer a process to a new or existing CMO.
Thank you, Jake. This is an excellent segue to my next question. So I'm going to invite Dr. Saran Malhi to speak. Saran, which projects do and do not need an engineering run?
Hi, Sarah. That's a great question. And I will say that for most projects, it's highly advisable to perform an engineering run. This is especially true for the processes that involve a complex formulation and a unique container closure combination. So from the formulation, those formulations which involve suspension or contain a drug substance which are temperature sensitive or are having a highly viscous formulations. And also if those are complex with a unique equipment or special container closure or plunger, or if it requires a lyophilization, those are the cases where engineering runs are recommended. In these processes, it is advised that an engineering run is performed and potentially even more than one engineering run to ensure that the process is fully effective, efficient, and fully understood at the operator levels. At BSM, if the process is complicated enough, we won't even agree to go into a GMP run without performing an initial run because the overall operation becomes risky. BSM will still advise that an engineering run is performed on one more simple projects. However, if the timeline is significantly short, we may consider going right into the GMP, but this is a very rare scenario. The project that doesn't require engineering runs will be very simple. It will be a simple filter and fill with little to no formulation prep required. We are talking about a product that involves only a thaw, mix, and a filter. It will use a common container and associated materials that we know are very compatible and we have filled multiple times in our filling lines. And it will not require a lyophilization, and the product should be a non-viscous product. This type of projects won't require engineering run because there is a little concern about the technology fit or understanding of the process. The other projects or the runs that won't require engineering runs will include any repeat batches. If a successful GMP fill was performed, then all repeated batches won't require an engineering run prior to the GMP run, since the process is well understood, controlled, and effectively performed at BSM. However, if there is a long lag between the GMP run, then you will need to run another formulation or a fill study to ensure that the team is properly trained and on the process prior to proceeding to a GMP run. Usually the lag would be would be greater than 4 months. And placebos, if the process mimics the drug product lot, or if it's very simple, like what was described earlier, then these products won't require an engineering run.
Thank you, Saran. Jake mentioned this before, but the engineering run and the GMP run are pretty close in cost. Why not just go straight into a GMP run, and if it fails, turn it into an engineering run?
Yes, this is a question we asked a lot by our clients. The cost to undergo an engineering run is typically only $20K less than the GMP run. So why shouldn't a client pay additional cost to upgrade the engineering run to a GMP run? And if things go awry, then the transition, the GMP run into engineering run. The downside of both approaches is that if the GMP run fails, then the drug product cannot be used for human use, and the cost is similar, even though the GMP is slightly more expensive. However, if the GMP is successful, then the drug substance and the money is invested on an engineering run. Firstly, any failed GMP batch will have to be explained and need to be supported with a significant deviation and the OOS. Not only can these create a large headache for the client and the CMO, it also takes a significant amount of time and effort to close those deviations and OOS. This will come at an additional cost because we don't code GMP runs with an expectation that they will fail and require significant effort for each of our teams and quality groups to wrap it up. Maybe more importantly is that the CMO needs to have a greater assurance of the success to even begin the manufacture of the GMP lot. These lots are for human use, and the CMO should be confident their GMP run will be successful. The FDA expects the same. Any failed GMP loss needs to be thoroughly investigated, and the root cause of we were just trying to save money is not acceptable to either CMO or FDA. There is an expectation that a GMP run is only initiated when you are confident in the process, and if you have one or more multiple failed GMP runs, it shows that either your drug product manufacture process is uncontrollable or the CMO lacks the ability to run the controlled GMP fill. Either way, a failed GMP run will cause regulatory agencies to look closer at how the CMO and your process were onboarded and the parameters were designed. Now some CMOs will have a line dedicated to the engineering run alone. These can help drive the cost of the engineering run down when compared to the cost of the true GMP run. However, an advantage of performing your engineering run on the filling line where your GMP will take place is that you can have much more confidence in the results of your engineering run. Your process will be tested under real world conditions so that you can enter your GMP run with no surprises. So can you march straight into the GMP run? Absolutely. Is it advisable? No. We have gone straight to GMP for some clients before. These are not often done. However, if the product meets the criteria discussed earlier, these can be successful. Engineering runs are an important step to transition a process, whether it's a brand new or well-established. They are critical to ensure good control strategy, and if the engineering run is skipped, then you will need to understand that the CMO may refuse and that add risk of failure that should not be taken lightly.
Thank you, Saran. That concludes today's presentation. In just a moment, we will transition to the Q&A portion of this webinar. Again, to ask a question, select the word bubble that appears in the toolbar at the right-hand side of your screen. An area to type in your question will appear. Go ahead and write us your questions. In that panel, you will also be able to download the slide deck from today's presentation. I'll give everyone a moment to put in their questions. Today's webinar is the second webinar of this series, the Sterile Filling 101 series. We have several upcoming events which are listed here, and a recording of our last webinar is also available. In June, we will be airing our next webinar regarding enhancing sterility assurance in isolator-based aseptic filling. Subject matter experts from Berkshire Sterile Manufacturing will discuss common situations that could allow isolator filling lines to become contaminated, and solutions to mitigate or eliminate these concerns. We will also introduce a new technology that offers increased sterility assurance in isolator-based aseptic manufacturing. Following the end of today's event, I will be sending you each an email with a sign-up link to all of the upcoming webinars, but you can also sign up for them by going to berkshiresterilmanufacturing.com/sterilefilling101, and the events will be listed there for you to register to. Okay, looks like we've got all our questions in. Let's get started with this first one. I think this would be best answered by Shufeng. So, Shufeng, what can you use the filled units from the engineering runs for?
The engineering runs units could be used for stability study or the method work, like method qualification, method development, such as CCIT or assay or any other methods. It can also be used for preclinical studies. Sometimes clients prefer to have a sterile product for clinical study. In those cases, they may add VHP in the engineering.
Thank you, Shufeng. This next question is going to go to Saran. Someone had asked, do you have to use the actual drug substance in the engineering run?
We can definitely give a thought on that based on the process variables and what constraints we have from the process. And like, for example, like if we are evaluating the solubility of the API for the engineering run, then definitely we cannot like skip the drug substance part into those engineering runs. However, if we are not evaluating the mixing study or any design constraint, then we can definitely have a placebo formulation and go through the whole process, and so that we have a confidence on our process flow and also have a confidence on our design, and that confidence can be taken over to our GMP runs.
Thanks, Saran. I think that was well said. I have another question. I'm going to direct this to Jake. The question is, how is an engineering run different from performing studies?
I think studies are great. And there's a place, an application for studies, and there's an application for engineering runs. If we have a very limited question, the scope of the question, then a study might be appropriate to answer that singular question. However, if we want to examine a full suite of parts working together and in symphony, we really want to have a full record to execute and a full team working on it so that we can examine operational parameters as they would be in GMP.
Thank you, Jake. The next question I'm going to hand it over to Saran. That question is, why do you prepare the full volume of drug product? And can you fill a smaller volume?
The purpose of engineering run is to build confidence on the proposed manufacturing process. Preparing an engineering batch with full volume of drug product removes all variables that can hinder the success of the GMP run. We can definitely accommodate requests for small batch sizes for engineering run. However, we need to understand the process variables first. And if we're confident that there will be no design constraint for scaling up, then we can definitely scale down the batch size for the engineering runs.
Well said. Shufeng, this one will go to you. What happens to the remaining drug product if it's not all filled?
The bulk drug product or filtered drug product that's not used in the filling typically got disposed after use. However, if the product require a compatibility study or a hold time study, these are good material for those purposes.
Thank you, Shufeng. I have another one for you. Someone had asked, what is the likelihood of a GMP lot failing if an engineering run is skipped?
It really depends. For a simple, well-understood process that the BSM is very familiar with, the risk is quite low. However, most of the process has its unique unique formulation and product stability. So the risk increase with the new information and complexity of the process.
Thank you, Shufeng. That was well said. I have one last question. This is going to go to Jake. The question is, how long does it take to prepare for an engineering run?
We like to have several weeks to prepare the record. It's a very involved document, and the time allows all the departments at BSM to review it properly. If scheduling has been possible, we could execute that record shortly after it is approved by BSM and the client.
Thank you, Jake. We're going to end on that last question. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone that's here today and who joined our webinar. And a thank you to our speakers, Dr. Shufeng Sun, Dr. Jake Kranz, and Dr. Saran Malhi. To all of our viewers that are here, keep your eye out for my email and don't forget to sign up for our other events, which you can do by going to berkshiresterilmanufacturing.com/sterilefilling101. I hope you took a lot away from today's presentation, and I hope to see you again in our future webinars.